in a world where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, where unseen forces lurk in the shadows, waiting to strike. One young woman's life was forever changed by the grip of unspeakable terror. Join us as we delve into the chilling depths of a true horror story that defies explanation. A tale of possession, jealousy, and malevolence beyond comprehension. Prepare to witness the unimaginable horrors that unfolded when darkness consumed the soul of an innocent girl. Long ago, I got to know Richard. I attended school with his girlfriend, and often we would hang out at a local club after school. I was 17 years old at the time, and he was 18. He and his girlfriend moved in together and later had a son. Years later, I ran into him by chance at a store, and from that point on, we started our contact again. He began texting me more frequently, and we became best friends. Secretly, I had a crush on him because he had transformed from a skinny teenager into a handsome, muscular man. Richard then confided in me that he had been separated from his girlfriend for many years and was now in a relationship with another woman. He mentioned that she was under the care of a gynecologist and that they were on the verge of getting married. I didn't hear from him for a while during that time. Meanwhile, my own relationship was doing bad, and I didn't feel like contacting friends. A year later, I saw Richard again at the store, and I immediately sensed that something was wrong. I was 35 at the time, and he was 36. I asked him if everything was okay, and he told me that his wife had passed away. She was 3 months pregnant. He invited me to his house to talk further, and I agreed to go with him. When I entered his house, I could already feel that something was wrong in that house. I felt like I was being watched, but he and I were the only ones in the house. I asked him if we could sit on the terrace and have a conversation about what was going on with him. What Richard told me next sent shivers down my spine. He said that his wife, I'll call her Stephanie, suddenly became very sick, and she had been under the care of a gynecologist for a long time, but they never found anything wrong. Her condition kept getting worse, and Richard eventually took her to a spiritual healer. The voodoo doctor discovered that Stephanie had been sacrificed by her own family. Her family did it for wealth and beauty. He explained that all the women in Stephanie's family were beautiful, and most of them were wealthy. They either married rich men or became successful entrepreneurs. He told me that at certain intervals, someone had to be sacrificed. Unfortunately, it was now Stephanie's turn. He said he gave her a proper funeral, but he couldn't find peace after everything that he had heard from the voodoo doctor. Dear people, in the meantime, while I was talking to Richard, he would go to Stephanie's grave almost every night to sleep there. When he told me that I wanted to run away from there, it frightened me. I asked him if he was going crazy, and he said, "No, Linda, I love her, and I miss her terribly." He told me that he used to feel a bit happier when he saw her, and if she didn't come, he would go to the cemetery to eat or sleep. So, I left Richard's house as quickly as I could. I could tell he wasn't well. I contacted his sister, and I asked her to keep an eye on her brother. Thankfully, she did, and she and her father made efforts to help him. I understand that he had to stay somewhere in his hometown for a week. During that week, they performed cultural rituals and cleansed him. Richard texted me again after that and asked if his sister and I could come to his house. He wanted to finally clear everything related to his late wife. I hesitated at first, but when his sister told me that one of her cousins would also help, I agreed to go. That house felt different now. I didn't feel like I was being watched anymore. On the contrary, I felt a kind of peace and contentment. Richard was going to move out of there, so we had to clean up everything. While I was there, 2 cousins were also present, so everything was going smoothly. However, Richard called me to help with a cabinet. He said it belonged to Stephanie, and I should just put everything from it into a box. He would take it to her mother. I started with her books, and his sister came in to help with her clothes. I remember her saying that Stephanie had beautiful clothes, so she would occasionally say, "Linda, look at this beautiful skirt or blouse." Meanwhile, I was calmly dealing with the books. I was in the middle of putting several thick books into a box when everything slipped from my hands. Some photos and a letter fell out. I picked up the photos and saw a stunning young woman, completely naked. She posed very seductively for the camera. I was naturally shocked, and at that very moment, Richard walked in. He immediately realized something was wrong and took the photo from my hand. He said, "This is Stephanie." He also said he had never seen that photo before. I told him there was also a letter and handed it to him. He read it and started smiling. He said, "Well, so it was all this time." I didn't understand him at first, but later I learned from his sister that it was a love letter written by Stephanie to her lover. It was a letter that was supposed to be delivered, but due to her illness, she had never had the chance to do so. Richard asked his sister and me if we could go outside because he wanted to be alone for a moment. Later, he came out and told us that he had found more photos in those books. He asked his sister and me to quickly clean up the items because he didn't want to see anything more. He said he was going to drive away for a bit because he wasn't feeling well. His sister and I went back inside to continue cleaning up. We saw that he had thrown the photos on the floor. They were intimate photos of Stephanie and her lover. His sister was shocked when she saw who Stephanie's lover was. It turned out to be Stephanie's so-called cousin. His sister told me that this cousin used to come to their parties, and they often had barbecue nights. All these years, Stephanie had lied that this man was her cousin. Later, I understood that this man was indeed some sort of distant relative. But in this case, he was Stephanie's secret lover. Richard never spoke of Stephanie again after this incident. He no longer mourned her. He gave all her belongings, including the photos and the letter, to her mother, and only then could he move on with his life. Richard and I stayed in touch. I was studying at the university at that time, and he supported me a lot. We started going out, and one thing led to another. We began developing feelings for each other, and I found him truly sweet. He spoiled me a lot, doing things my ex never did. For instance, he brought flowers to my workplace. He would text or call me in between to check if everything was okay. Once, he picked me up and took me to a romantic place. He had arranged a table with goodies and candles in advance. It was at this place that he asked me to be his girlfriend. He introduced me to his parents, and his sister told me she saw our relationship coming. His family was very kind to me, and I was at Richard's almost every day. Whenever I was with Richard, I automatically visited his parents. After a few months, I introduced him to my parents, and we were happily together. During that time, I was renovating my house, and Richard took over almost everything. He told me to save my money. When I turned 38, he organized a party for me. I didn't have to do anything. His sister took me shopping at his expense, and in the meantime, he was busy arranging everything. As we drove to his house, I immediately saw the balloon decoration, and I saw a beautiful black Mercedes in the driveway. Initially, I thought a friend or someone was visiting. We got out, and Richard came to meet us. He said, "Here you go, Mamie. This is for you." So, that Mercedes was my gift. I was naturally happy and started crying. And he told me that I helped him in his dark period, and he would never forget that. I said, "But I didn't do anything." He then said that I was there for him and always had a listening ear for him. Furthermore, he said, I never said anything unpleasant about that situation with the photos. He appreciated that. Not long after my birthday, I fell ill. I felt sick. It turned out I was already 6 weeks pregnant. When we found out, we were so happy. Richard took my hand and said he would never leave me and would always be there for me. I teared up and was the happiest woman. He was very pleased with my pregnancy and often said he would be happy if I had a girl. As I wrote in part 1, he already had a son with his first girlfriend. Richard and I stayed at my place, but we also often slept at his place. Suddenly, I got sick. I was constantly vomiting. Nothing stayed in my stomach. Due to the forcing during vomiting, I started seeing more bleeding. I was admitted, and I had to rest and couldn't have sex with Richard anymore. I followed the rules, and so did Richard. One night, while we were sleeping, I had a scary dream. I dreamed that I was on a beach, and a beautiful woman was lying next to me. When I looked closely, I saw that it was Stephanie. In my dream, we were friends, enjoying ourselves on a beach. Suddenly, Stephanie turned to me, and I saw a malicious look in her eyes. She said, "Linda, don't think that Richard is yours. He will always be mine." The way she looked at me became truly terrifying. I woke up startled, but I didn't tell Richard anything about my dream. I thought it was just a dream, and I wanted to forget it as quickly as possible. Not even a week later, I dreamed that I was in an abandoned wooden house. Suddenly, I saw a well in the yard. I went to look and saw 2 giant snakes crawling out of it. One was red, and the other was yellow. Both had black spots. I screamed in my dream and started running. I entered the dilapidated wooden house and closed the door. Suddenly, I saw all kinds of small and large snakes crawling in that house. They came from all corners. I screamed again, but a grandma came and said sternly to me, "Open your eyes now, or it will go wrong." I woke up screaming, and when I got up, blood fell on the ground. I had bled again. Only this time, it was a lot. I even thought I was having a miscarriage. Richard called my parents, and he quickly took me to the emergency room. There, I was immediately helped, and it turned out that my cervix was slightly open. The doctor told Richard that I would be admitted and that he needed to get clothes and such for me. A ring was placed around my uterus, and I was not supposed to do anything strenuous. I just had to rest. I told Richard about my dream, but he didn't see any harm in it. I told my mother about my dream, and she said it was a bad omen and that I should be careful. It was not a pleasant time. I could feel that ring in my lower abdomen, and I was scared. One evening, we were watching TV, and I fell asleep right there. Richard didn't want to wake me up and let me sleep peacefully. That's when I had another dream. Once again, I dreamed about that big red and yellow snake. Only this time, they were in a hole full of other small snakes. I woke up and told Richard about my dream. I called my mother, and she said we needed to do something. She took me to a voodoo doctor, and he told me that it had to do with his ex, Stephanie, and that I had to perform a ritual to get rid of her. He also said he saw something dark around me. I didn't know what he meant. We performed the ritual, and he told me that from now on, I had to be extra strong and pray a lot. At one point, he and I were alone in his room, and he quickly told me to be careful with Richard because he saw someone else walking beside him. I was shocked because I immediately thought of my dream with Stephanie. That evening, I asked Richard if he still thought about Stephanie. He denied it and asked why. Only then did I tell him about my dream with Stephanie. He then said he no longer thought about her and that he focused on me. Furthermore, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. Dear people, exactly a week later, I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I went to the toilet, but nothing happened. I called my mother, and she said I should go straight to the emergency room. Upon arrival, I started having contractions. No one could do anything. The gynecologist wasn't there, and they left me alone in the hospital for hours. The next day, they took me to the ward, and a doctor came who said they urgently needed to remove that ring. Without anesthesia, the ring around my uterus was removed. I was brought back to the ward, and the doctor explained to me that there was something wrong with my pregnancy. All the ultrasounds were fine. He prepared me that I would give birth very soon, but my baby wouldn't make it. He also asked me to stay strong. Exactly during visiting hours, I felt something like a balloon coming out of me. I screamed and called the nurses. They asked all visitors to leave the ward, including my parents, sister, and Richard. My little boy was born. Unfortunately, 3 months too early. He breathed for only half an hour. He was so small, and I held him in a cloth in my hands. I remember that we cried, and I spoke to him. The period after that was blurry. I was angry and sad at the same time. My mother took me back to the same voodoo doctor, and he said I had to do the ritual again. During the ritual, the voodoo doctor went into a trance and shouted that Stephanie's spirit had taken my baby. Stephanie would never accept that another woman would get Richard's love, and she would continue to wander the earth until every beautiful woman in her family paid for what had been done to her. People, I was so shocked that I sat frozen on the bench and couldn't find my words. The voodoo doctor then told me that I would have to choose for myself. He said, if you want a happy life, leave this man because he is not meant for you. I explained calmly to Richard, and I said that I couldn't continue with him. At first, he didn't accept it because he thought he loved me and was no longer busy with his deceased wife. But I kept thinking about my dream and everything I had experienced. He asked me if I wanted to marry him, but I refused and ended the relationship myself. Of course, I also had a lot of sadness because he is truly a kind person. Years have passed now. Richard and I still have occasional contact. He still has no other steady woman, just flings here and there. I now have another man, and we have a healthy son together, and I am happy in my relationship. Thank you for listening to my story. Like and subscribe because we produce new true stories every week.